I have my guest joining me now, Walter Block. I think I got his name wrong the first time. But anyway, Walter Block is the correct name. Professor of Economics at Loyola University's College of Business Administration. He's the author of Defending the Undefendable, on why America's downtrodden would be better off this holiday season were billionaire philanthropists to skip charities and keep their cash in their businesses. Walter, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, and thanks for having me on your show. It's a delight.
Well, thanks for coming on and teaching, hopefully, sound economics to young Americans. But so you're going to talk about, I think it's most recently, right, it's in the news, you've got all these billionaires that have taken this pledge, this gifting pledge, to give half their money to charity. And I know a lot of very high-profile billionaires have decided to do that. I'm not actually even sure. Does that mean, do they all have enough liquid cash to physically be able to donate, or would it require selling a lot of assets in order to raise that kind of money?
Well, I imagine it varies from billionaire to billionaire. Some are very liquid and could give half their total wealth in monetary form, and half would have to sell something because they're not as liquid.
Well, would they have to give it away prior to death, or can you leave a will and give money to charity, and then that gift would be exempted from the estate tax?
I'm really not sure about that. I don't know about the tax situation of these people. All I know is that it's a very, very bad idea. Some of the people that are pledging include Warren Buffett and Bill Gates and New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg, media moguls Barry Diller and Ted Turner, Oracle co-founder Larry Ellison, Star Wars movie maker George Lucas, and energy tycoon T. Boone Pickens.
Yeah.
So there are lots of different people with lots of different financial situations as to how liquid they are. I really don't know if you can give it away after your death. I think what Buffett and Bill Gates are the instigators of this. I think they want them to give it away while they're alive.
I think from a charitable perspective, I think that to the extent, I know that there is a certain amount of personal gratification and joy with respect to giving money away, and people get to enjoy your gift. So I'm sure that when people are giving away large sums of money, they probably want to do it while they're still around, so they can they can participate in the joys that do accompany giving.
Yes, I think that's quite right.
But, from an economic perspective, I think your point, and I would probably agree, that destroying these large fortunes is not going to be a positive long-term for the U.S. economy, and certainly for the poorest people who would disproportionately benefit from a wiser stewardship of those personal fortunes.
Yes, I think you're quite right. Take Bill Gates as an example. He's made zillions of dollars. I think the exact amount is 1.3 zillion. I'm just kidding here. He's made a lot of money. And how has he made it? He's made it by enriching other people. Every time Bill Gates sold something, a computer, software, hardware, whatever he sells, mainly software, the people who bought it from him valued it at a price higher than what he sold it to them at. For example, if he sold them a $500 computer, they valued it at $501 or more, so they gained from it, and obviously he valued it less than that, so he gained. So there was mutual profit. And I think this goes for every other billionaire, at least every other billionaire who earned it honestly. Now, there are some who didn't earn it exactly honestly, but for the ones who earned it honestly, we can say as economists that every penny they earned, they did by benefiting the people with whom they dealt, not only the customers but also their employees. If they hired someone for $100,000, well, then that person valued the job at more than $100,000.
Well, I think some of it too, though. Wouldn't it depend on? Maybe if some of the money is given to fund, medical research that might, help, speed up curing cancers or other diseases like that. Certainly there could be some good that might come of those donations.
Well, yes, I'm not against charity. I don't think charity should be prohibited by law or anything like that. and certainly some good can come out of it. But the point is that when you earn it in the marketplace, we know apodictically, axiomatically true that you're benefiting people, whereas when you give it in charity, it's not quite so clear that there are benefits.
Well, there are certainly benefits initially to the people who are the recipients of the charity. There's no question that if somebody's handed money, they're better off than they were before they got it.
Right.
So there is an immediate, but the question is long term, what is the best way to benefit the recipients of the charity? Is it to just give them money? Or is it better maybe to give them a job? And
well,
if
they say that the best way is to not give someone a fish, but to teach them how to fish and maybe get them a
yeah, I mean, I think that people like Bill Gates would be much better off using that money to further invest in making their businesses more productive, more competitive, whether it's new plant and equipment that they're investing in, new research and development that they think will be profitable, and use that money for that, or to expand new businesses, to fund new entrepreneurs. Maybe instead of setting up charitable funds, they should be setting up venture capital funds to scrutinize and look for budding entrepreneurs with promising ideas and good business plans and that they can fund, so that we can have the benefit of this money multiplied, compounded over the generations, and not simply use it quickly on consumption. And then when the poor people who benefit from the charities finish spending that money, they'll be just as poor, but now the money will be gone. And so will the potential to use it in a way to grow the standard of living for everybody.
Yes, I certainly agree with you. Let's take Bill Gates and education as an example. Now, you're quite right. Whenever he gives money in charity, the person who receives it benefits. Otherwise, he wouldn't take it. If he thought he'd lose, he would say, well, take a hike, Bill. I'm not taking your money. But you're quite right to put it in the question of, well, does it help, say, education or medicine or whatever it is in general? And here it's not so clear. For example, I've got in front of me an interview that Bill Gates did with this Canadian magazine, Maclean's. And what he's talking about is he's saying that we really have to fix up the public schools. And I think you're quite right. Instead of fixing up the public schools, which I think are as a snare and a delusion, what Bill should do is set up private schools and compete for students. And in other words, do the sort of a thing that he did that made Microsoft so productive, namely get into the competitive market and start a business.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, one of the worst things we can do with money is drop it down the educational rat hole.
Yeah.
And, every politician, everybody is out there with the same thing. We need more education. And they always equate more education with more money spent in the name of education. But the problem is that doesn't work. We can double the amount that we're spending on education and still produce kids that are less educated. I mean, we're already spending more than any other country in the world, and look at the pathetic results we have to show for it.
Absolutely. And when you compare the amount of money per capita or per student spent on students of the public schools and the private schools, the public schools spend 2 to 3 times more. That is 100 to 200% more. Than the private schools, and yet the private schools seem to have a much better record. Could it be because they have to compete, and could it be because competition has beneficial effects?
Absolutely. And you know what? If we didn't have the public schools, there'd be much more competition, and those private schools would be even more efficient at delivering education. Because, there are so many people that are stuck in that public school system because they're paying all these taxes, and because they can't afford taxes to pay for public schools and tuition to pay for private schools. But if the government didn't provide the public schools and instead allowed their residents to pay lower taxes, then the money they didn't pay in taxes they would have to shop around for a good school to send their kids to.
Quite right. I think that is exactly right. And it's really a double tax in effect on the people who send their kids to private school, because they have to pay once for private school tuition and a second time for taxes to send other kids to go to public school. And what about the grandma who's got no grandchildren? Well, the grandma has to have grandchildren, but suppose you have an old person, an old lady, who has no grandchildren. She's got to pay for other people's kids to go to public school. And
people should pay. I'm divorced. Right, my kid's in public school, in where my ex-wife lives, but she's paying property taxes on her house, and so he's in school there. But I'm in another town. I have no kids in the school system there, and I'm paying all these property taxes for other people's kids to go to school, and so yeah. I mean, I think that it's not fair. I mean, some person might decide that they don't want to have kids, right? And because somebody decides they don't want to have kids, why should they have to pay to educate the kids of the people who do want to have kids? Because as a father, I think that there's nothing better than having kids. I would have liked to have had more kids. But I get the benefit of having a kid. I get the joy that comes with fatherhood. But why should I pass the cost on to somebody else? If somebody is going to give up all that benefit and not have a child, why should they have to pay? They should at least have that extra money to get some other joy out of life because they're missing one of the greatest joys that they could have had.
Yes, I hate to agree with you so much, but I certainly do. And, another dimension of this whole public school thing is if you go back a bit into history, really what public education started out as was a Protestant attack on Catholics. Now, here we got two Jewish guys. We have no dog in that fight in some sense, but it's really unfair. You see, what happened was the Protestants were here first, and then came the Irish and the Italians at the turn of the last century, and the upper class WASPs said that, this is horrible, we can't allow this, they came in as immigrants, but then what they did is they set up their own private schools, and they were teaching popery and papacy and all sorts of evil things in the eyes of the Protestants. And the Protestants weren't powerful enough to get the Catholics to stop with their Catholic schools, but they were powerful enough to set up this thing called public schools, where people would go for free, and then the Catholics would have to pay twice, as I said, once for their...
Yeah, because certainly, look, there's nothing in the Constitution about public schools. The word education or school does not even appear in the Constitution. So it wasn't really something that the founders were thinking about. And, I agree, education is extremely important, which is why we don't want to leave it up to the government. We want the free market to deliver education because that's the only way to get the best education at the lowest price. And we also have to discriminate how we give it because not everybody benefits from a college degree. Not everybody benefits from a master's or even a high school degree. And we can't just encourage people to go to school when they'd be better off doing something else. But the government establishment, through all these, through the government, it keeps people in this system to benefit itself, even when there's no economic viability for the student to continue. And all it does is drive up the cost and disrupt the experience for the people that really do belong and do benefit from the higher education.
You're quite right. In the early days, people would not everyone can benefit from even a high school or even an elementary school education. In the early days, people would become apprentices, and they would learn on the job. And they would learn stuff that was actually helping them to be productive in
And, of course, you go back and you look at older buildings and you look at the craftsmanship and the workmanships, and you can admire all of that and say, why can't people do that today? Well, because the people who learned how to do that weren't in school.
Right.
They learned these crafts from an early age, and they made a good living and supported their family based on their talents and their abilities. We don't have that. Now, if we get good craftsmen, they're all immigrants. Because they learned it from their fathers in another country. Because they couldn't learn it from their fathers here because we shoved them off to school.
That's right. And for some kids, it's like a 16-year jail sentence, and they didn't even commit any crime.
Absolutely. Hey, we got to hold on. We're coming up to a break. We'll be right back to continue this discussion, so don't go away.
Please come on for Christmas. Please come on for Christmas.
The Peter Schiff Show. Since the Peter Schiff Show was last on the air, the national debt added another $7.89 million. Luckily, Peter's intelligence is growing twice as fast.
That's incredible.
Welcome back to your source of sanity in an insane world. It's the Peter Schiff Show.
We are back, and I am discussing charitable giving, education with Walter Block, professor of economics at Loyola University. Walter, I think what's going on here with a lot of these high-profile billionaires giving away so much money is I think today there are very few people who are willing to defend capitalism, who are willing to stand up for those principles, and instead they take the easy way out. They want to be liked. They want people to think that they're good, and the way they show how much they care is by how much of their wealth they're willing to give away. And, of course, when you're a billionaire and you give away $500 million, it doesn't hurt you. I mean, these billionaires have everything that they want. There's nothing that they're denying themselves by making these gifts. What they're doing is buying something that money can't buy, or at least they think they're doing it, and that's the admiration of everybody else. They want to be held in high regard and high esteem, and the way they do that is by making this gesture that reality costs them nothing. But if they actually thought about it and understood it, these gestures are going to make the country poorer, not richer.
Well, I think you're quite right. They give up very little because, I mean, how many Maseratis and Rolls Royces can you drive? Even if you had 100 in your garage, you're nowhere near to spending the kind of money that these people have, and yachts and whatever, jet planes. How many jet planes do you want?
Well, you can only fly one at a time.
Right.
So, I mean, Warren Buffett he's, 70-something. He's got, $20-30 billion. I mean, even if he wanted to spend all that money himself, it would be, I don't care. Even if he bought a jet plane every day, it's not going to live long enough to go through that money.
Yes, I think you're quite right. There is one other source of this sort of a thing, which I think is not as nefarious or not as problematical. It's more defensive, and that is, the way I interpret the antitrust case against Microsoft, it had nothing to do with what they said it had to do with, exploiting the poor or selling high prices or, out-competing people. What it was is, here is this nerd who's out in the Seattle area, and he's not paying off the boys in either the Democratic or the Republican parties. I think it is the 7 most richest counties are right around the D.C. area, and there's a reason for that. And they launched an antitrust case against him because he wasn't paying off. Well, he's paying off now, and there'll be no more antitrust cases, as far as I can see, against him. So that might be one of the sources, and if that's the source, then it's not really his fault. It's more
then what you're saying is it's really blackmail.
Yes.
And he's giving to charity because he fears if he doesn't, they're going to steal more from him through taxes or antitrust. So he's voluntarily given before they take from him.
Well, I would say more extortion than blackmail, but we're on the same wavelength here. It's a threat that they're making implicitly, that if you don't behave yourself and be a good boy and give to public education and give to all sorts of other things that we want you to give to, and also give to us, the Democrats and the Republicans.
To continue to promote that idea that benefits nobody but the teachers and the universities. And I was very disappointed. I did watch, somebody mentioned it yesterday, I watched a special last night on CNBC about the high cost of education, and for an entire hour, they basically completely missed, the 800-pound elephant in the room, which was that government-guaranteed loans and government aid was the sole reason that college was so expensive in the first place, and the sole reason that so many young Americans are graduating under mountains of debt. It's because of the government. It's because the government is there to help them. All they've done is help the universities and sold our kids down the river and stuck them with all this debt.
You're quite right. The 800-pound gorilla here is certainly the government, and you've got a lot of college presidents who are making $2, $3, $4 million. Why, they're making as much as some professional athletes, and that's crazy.
Absolutely. Well, anyway, on that note, we're running out of time. So, Walter, thanks again for being my guest. Your book, Defending the Undefendable. Thanks again. You're a good guest, and your students at Loyola are lucky to have a right-thinking professor to educate them.
Thanks for having me on your show.
Okay. Anyway, don't go away. We've got another full hour of the Peter Schiff Show. So if you have any calls, 855-4SCHIFF. And you'll get in the queue. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
The Peter Schiff Show.